Shalom and welcome to another episode of Jerusalem Studio. The Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, which is almost landlocked and has a demographic majority of citizens of Palestinian origin, has traditionally been considered one of the more fragile of the Arab countries, yet in recent years it has been surprisingly resilient, while its neighbors succumb to domestic and regional turmoil. It is important to know that the security and stability of Jordan is closely linked to peace with its western neighbor, the State of Israel. To discuss this important topic and the relationship between Israel and Jordan, we're joined by Colonel in Reserve Reuven Ben-Shalom, who's a cross-cultural strategist and associate at the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism. Welcome. I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren, and Dr. Joshua Krasna, who is a fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and a lecturer on Middle East security at NYU. Welcome. Mr. Oren, give us a broader understanding on the significance of the 25-year-long relations between Israel and Jordan.
It's a peculiar feature of the Middle East turmoil that monarchies have become more stable than republics or even countries led by military dictators or juntas. And King Abdallah II, following in the footsteps of his late father, King Hussein, has managed to keep his kingdom in a very successful manner, even though it neighbors Syria and Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and perhaps because of the other neighbor, Israel. The relationship between Israel and Jordan is very successful. It's excellent on the security side, less so on the diplomatic side, because of the chill between the current government led by Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Jordanian government. And one reflection of that is that after 25 years of a peace agreement, Jordan did not extend the lease it gave Israel in 1994 over two pieces of territory adjacent to both countries. Had the relationship between the governments been warmer, Israel would have probably been given another extension. But the population in Jordan, as far as one can gauge public opinion, was against it, and the king didn't see any real reason to give Netanyahu a gift, so to speak. But again, the militaries on both sides have excellent relations. Not all of the facts have been disclosed or can be disclosed for fear that it will endanger the Jordanians, but both countries benefit from this cooperation.
Colonel Ben-Shalom, the State of Israel views its eastern neighbor, Jordan, as vital to its security, considering the fact that, of course, the longest border stretches on the eastern front of Israel, and the stability of Jordan, a friendly neighbor, is vital in order to divert the military resources elsewhere. To what degree is this relationship truly strong, as Mr. Oren mentioned, to the degree of joint works and so on, as former IDF Deputy Chief of Staff Yair Golan stated at one of his addresses several years back, that on the intelligence front, for instance, there is extensive cooperation between the Jordanian intelligence and the Israeli, of course, also the Egyptian on that matter.
I think many issues in the Middle East, or in general in the world, you have to first look at geography, look at the map. And when you look at the map, you understand the strategic importance. You talked about the long border. Let's just imagine that Israel had to face daily terror attacks or penetrations from the border. That would have been very difficult for us, very challenging. I wouldn't say that that is the key to Israel's defense, but certainly it's a vital component. And if we can have that aspect of our defense covered with very good relationship, and of course that's very important.
It happened in the late 60s until so-called Black September of 1970.
Of course, a very important chapter in our defense history. Now, the interesting thing about Jordan, I think, is that the political situation forces them to have this outward rhetoric that's very critical of Israel. So in a way, this is my own assessment, that it's like this game where we have to allow them to be very critical overtly and even criticize and bash us in many aspects that have to do with Jerusalem. Some of it is really almost, preposterous, but under the radar have this excellent cooperation because we both extremely benefit from that cooperation. We said on the intelligence level, security, counter-terrorism. Look at the interesting role that the Americans are now playing with their presence, with their footprint in Jordan. And they clearly state what they're there for stability. So we have to keep this in mind. I do have to say that even though we have what we call in Hebrew a cold peace with Jordan, there's much respect. There's great respect in Israel for Jordan. There always has been. Even in times of crisis, even when they were our enemies, that's surprising. That when we go back and we debrief together the old battles, and today we walk the battlegrounds with them together, we don't relate to them like we relate to terrorists. They were honorable fighters, fighting for their country. Even when we had Israeli POWs held in Jordan, they were treated honorably and respectfully according to international law. So every aspect that I judge, I see honor and respect, mutual respect, and very fruitful collaboration. Unfortunately, not enough to be overt that all the people will be happy with.
Indeed. Dr. Krasna, you studied Jordan for quite an extensive period of time and on different levels. To what degree do you look at the current situation in the Hashemite Kingdom vis-a-vis Israel and also on a larger scale of regional challenges?
So one of the interesting things about Jordan is that its weakness is its biggest source of strength. And the reason is that since the Jordanian kingdom was set up, from the first day it's set up, it's been under threat. So they never became complacent like the regimes did in Egypt or in Iraq or anywhere else. Every morning, whoever the king is wakes up and goes, where's it going to come today? And because of that, the royal family, the Hashemites, have, first of all, created an internal security system which really is extremely sensitive to everything that's going on. And also, they themselves manage a constant sort of trimming, a constant ability to sense problems and try to head them off, either by reform or by repression, by whatever works first. And for that, and by building a national identity, which you pointed out that many people in Jordan are, or that a majority of people in Jordan are of Palestinian origin. But the truth is, if you ask almost any Jordanian, including the Jordanian of Palestinian origin, if you ask him, what are you? He'll say, I'm a Jordanian. Mm-hmm. And this process, which is called Jordanization, is something that they've really worked on and has worked quite well for them. There is a real feeling in Jordan of Jordanian patriotism. That doesn't mean that they're not critical. And certainly during the Arab Spring, you began to see indications of this. The Jordanians handled it a lot better, and what the crowds were asking for wasn't the same thing they were. There were no cries like you heard then in Egypt and in Libya and in Tunisia, or like you hear today in Lebanon and Iraq of Ashab Yurid Sukut Nizam, that the people want the fall of the regime. They didn't want the fall of the regime. They wanted the regime to reform. They wanted the regime to be better. They wanted the regime to be a regime which I would say is now partly free, to be more free. And then over the years, you see, usually for economic reasons, there are some riots, but it's never the same thing that you see in other countries.
Is the fact that the kingdom or the lineage of the king and his family are believed to be the descendants of the Muslim prophet Muhammad, which we could see in certain instances, especially when the Islamic State tried to invade into Jordan, that the people of Jordan stood resilient, even though some of them were sympathizers of the Islamic State. They said, listen, he's the descendant of the prophet, and we want to keep him there.
So absolutely. Amir mentioned that the monarchies did better than the republics in the Arab world during the Arab Spring and since the Arab Spring. And there's two reasons for that. The first is a monarchy in the Arab world has a lot more legitimacy than a republic. In the end, a republic doesn't have any legitimacy, and especially in places like Egypt and Libya, where the president was trying to actually pass the rule down to his son, what they call a Jumlukiya, which is a Republican kingdom. it wasn't working well. But here, as you said, the king here, the king of Morocco, can trace his lineage all the way back, and that gives him a tremendous amount of legitimacy. The moment the king dies, the next king is the king and in both in traditional Arab society, but also in the point of view of societies which have seen what other countries have gone through in the Middle East and are very concerned that they don't go through the same thing. So this legitimacy and this stabilization is a tremendous thing. The other thing is that we have to remember that once problems started in the Arab world, the Arab monarchies formed an alliance to roll it back. And that's what happened in Egypt, and that's why things didn't get settled in Libya and didn't get settled in Yemen or in Syria in the same way. So I think, yes, absolutely. The fact that the legitimacy is also religious legitimacy that the king enjoys, is certainly a key factor in his keeping power. One of them is that, and one of them is, as a king, he tries to portray himself and tries to act as almost the father of his people. He interacts with the people at a very individual level. He goes out. This thing they always claim about him, that he dresses as a regular man and goes out on the street without his guards to hear what's going on. And of course, he's photographed doing this, right?
Of course.
But so the point is, yes, and I think it does help, and the fact that he has this religious legitimacy does help. I think it causes a problem in a specific issue that's relevant to us, which is in Jerusalem. Because since his legitimacy is partially religious, and since part of that legitimacy comes from the fact that he presents himself as the guardian of the holy places in Jerusalem, then when things happen in Jerusalem, or when Israeli politicians talk loosely about Jerusalem, then that in the end requires him to make a very, very strong reaction, because if he doesn't make that reaction, then he's actually burrowing under the legitimacy that he has.
In tandem, that said, Mr. Oren, Israel is the reason that Jordan today has that legitimacy that it hoped for, at least, on the Temple Mount, Haram el-Sharif, as they call it in Arabic. To what degree do Jordan look at the situation and say, okay, Israel granted us by means of the Waqf, which is the Islamic watchers of the holy sites in Islam, also on that piece of land that is holy to Jews and holy to others as well. To what degree do they see their relations with Israel intertwined into making that possible?
Reuven earlier mentioned geography. History is also part of it. Now, of course, the British set up the state of Palestine, or the entity of Palestine, which included both banks of the River Jordan. And only in 1946 was a partition of the two conducted. And then, after the 1948-49 war, the East Bank of Jordan, the Hashemite Kingdom, annexed the West Bank by force, and it was only recognized by Britain and Pakistan. No other country in the world recognized it, and it is a sort of a lesson regarding the Israeli annexation of the Golan Heights, which is another matter. Now, after Israel took over the West Bank in 1967, the Israelis wisely let the Waqf, and mostly the Jordanians, have control over the religious part of East Jerusalem, because they didn't want to mix politics and religion. They knew that this would be explosive, as well it is. And there was this device of the three kings, the three monarchs, the Saudi, the Moroccan, and the Jordanian. And King Abdallah's grandfather, King Abdallah, or great-grandfather, Abdallah I, was assassinated at the temple by a Palestinian.
At the location of the temple.
At the location of the temple, and of course, this was one reason why his grandson, King Hussein, later wrote...
His son, yeah.
No, his son was Talal.
Oh, sorry,
but,
yes.
his grandson, Hussein, wrote Uneasy Lies the Head, which wears the crown, because there were other assassination attempts. Now, Jordan, when it was weak, was a buffer state between Israel and Iraq. And the Israeli fear was that the Iraqi military, which was second only to the Egyptian one, would invade Jordan, cross the river Jordan, and take positions on the West Bank, which is only a few miles from the Mediterranean. This changed after the Six-Day War, but nevertheless, as was mentioned earlier, because of the long and porous border, Israel had to find some secret channels in order to conduct joint security with the Jordanians. And this, indeed, is what takes place. Israeli colonels and generals frequently meet with the Jordanian counterparts, but this is a very discreet undertaking. Officially, overtly, the Jordanians must react to whatever Israel does, which is not to the liking of the population. Jordan, as we all know, in 1988 disengaged from the West Bank, leaving Israel to negotiate with the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And both Egypt and Jordan indeed have a sort of a cold peace with Israel. The embassies don't really function, the diplomatic missions. Israeli diplomats hardly ever stay over for a weekend in Amman. They go back every Thursday night or Friday morning to Jerusalem or wherever they live in Israel and come back in a convoy Sunday or Monday. So they're only holding the flag. So on the symbolic level, relations are not that good, but deep down they are.
Can I just say my lesson from this historic perspective?
Go ahead.
It means that we humans are ridiculous when we relate to things that are happening now as if this is some, truth written in stone 2,000 years ago, when sometimes it's just man-made inventions from not too many years ago when these arbitrary entities were allocated, given names. So if in 1988 the Jordanians relinquished actually officially the West Bank, so whose is it really? So are we really occupiers on the West Bank? There are many lessons to be learned. Yes,
indeed.
sorry.
Nevertheless, of course, in the West Bank, which are three different districts, Judea, Samaria, and Jordan Valley, are still in question, and there is a lot of discussions going on between Israel and the Jordanians, even though in the past, when we traveled there extensively, we could see the picture of King Hussein. Everywhere, in almost every household, had a picture of the King of Jordan hanged in their living room. Today, it's less so. Didn't continue to his son, King Abdullah II.
For a long time, his summer resort at Shuafat, not far from here, was maintained for him.
Correct. But at the same time, there is still a lot of tension between the government of Jordan, which is not, obviously, it's appointed by the monarch after there is an advisory election by the people of Jordan, but it is ultimately put there, and a majority of them are not always very keen on preserving the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan. To what degree is this really impacting the decision-making of the king?
I think it doesn't. I think the king is very calculated. He understands the important strategic aspects of this alliance. I call it an alliance. And yes, there are many emotions there. And remember who the Jordanians are. Count the refugees in now, more than 1 million refugees from Syria and about 2 million Palestinians. It's substantial numbers that strongly influence the narratives. And the government, of course, represent the people, and those things come up and they're spoken in the parliament. When I see hatred there sometimes, I don't always brush it away and say, oh, that's just being overt. They really like us. No, I think a lot of them hate our guts, unfortunately. But I think, yes, at the king's level, a very close relationship with us, calculated, strategic. And it's not only this king, it goes way back. The piece of land we just unfortunately gave back now, there was a famous meeting there between Golda Meir and the king. And again, many of these things, when they happened, they weren't in the news. So I don't like it. It saddens me to see my neighbors, my Jordanian brothers, feel this way and relate this way to us. I also think that in a way we should enable this and not be insulted from this. And in this balance, in this game, I think we can't play the same game. We are not allowed to do what they do. So I think, for instance, in 2007, the incident in Amman, where an Israeli security guard was defending himself and killed a Jordanian. I think it was a mistake by our
2017.
2017. I think it was a mistake by our prime minister, receive him in open hands with the media and hug him that was a PR mistake. So you could say the Jordanians do that to us all the time. Why can't we do it? Because we have to be different. I think we have to be better in understanding the delicacy of the situation and respecting the Jordanians and respecting the situation and nurturing it for the strategic goals.
Dr. Krasna, I want to hear your perspective on this matter, but at the same time, I also want to know to what degree all this rhetoric that we hear in the media from the Jordanian side, but also from the Israeli side to a certain extent, is not crossing a certain line, considering also the fact that, yes, it was important for the Jordanian king to demand those territories back, but at the same time, the title of those territories was the Island of Peace, and the Island of Peace being returned to Jordan from Israel, is there, beyond that symbolism, something?
So first of all, I have to disagree a little bit with my friend Reuven. I think that the king is very aware of public opinion regarding the relations with Israel, and I think a lot of what he does, certainly on the overt level, is because of that. I think the reason why, in the end, the agreement regarding Naharaim and so far was not renewed, and by it wasn't a lease, because we didn't pay them anything for it. It was a gesture that had been made at the time because they thought that the peace, both sides, both leaders at the side, thought that the peace would be so warm that it wouldn't make a difference. But what happened is we made peace with a country that's not a democracy. When we make peace with countries that's not democracy, it's the same thing in Egypt. If the people had been allowed to vote whether they wanted the peace treaty or not, there wouldn't be a peace treaty. That doesn't mean it's not a good idea that we have it. It's an excellent idea, and it provides tremendous things to Israeli security. However, the Jordanian people never really liked the agreement. They were disappointed very quickly. They expected it to be very, very quick, tremendous economic benefits, and there weren't. And some of that is our fault. I'll get to that in a minute. But so the king understands the bedrock of the relationship he keeps, right? The security relationship is the most important, and that he needs to keep. But anything past that, he's very alert to what it looks like. And it's not for nothing that he hasn't met with Netanyahu for years. Right? It's not for nothing that he has a very strong position on the Temple Mount. It's not for nothing that he didn't agree to renew the agreement. Right? He said, if the relationship was warm, then maybe the agreement would have continued. But in the parliament and among the public, there was tremendous outcry to not renew the agreement. And
weekly protests for
there
them.
were weekly protests. There were votes in the parliament, but also there was this feeling that that to renew it would be giving a prize to Israel, that it would be hard to explain to the people why he was giving it. Now, for instance, on the gas deal that they made, which they $10 billion gas deal, which is very, very important to Jordan, there are tremendous demonstrations. It doesn't make a difference. They're never going to pull out of that deal because the interest there is very, very clear. And for that reason, he's able to put national interest very openly against appeasing public opinion. But on other issues, a lot less. So yes, it's the island of peace, and you know, we would be very happy if the situation continued there. But in the end, there was a loophole that was written into the peace agreement, and he just used that.
May I add, a few weeks ago, a group of prominent Jewish Americans visited Amman and met with a very senior Jordanian official. The conversation was not for retribution, so his name will go unmentioned. And they came out so impressed with his positive outlook that they called from Amman some of their Israeli friends and said, this is a great guy. The next day, this same official, in a public forum, had such an anti-Israeli speech because he had to. Now, some Jordanians have taken the time to be convinced that Israel is no longer, or anyone in the Israeli elite, is no longer of the idea of Jordan is Palestine, which was an idea held by people like Ariel Sharon before he was prime minister, namely, let the Palestinians take over Jordan, let them depose the king, and they will probably see the East Bank as the Palestinian state and leave us alone. A very simplistic and not a very serious idea.
Even though more than 77% of Jordanians are of Palestinian origin.
But it doesn't mean that they are not going to demand the West Bank and perhaps points west. So we are way past that. The Jordanians know that Israel doesn't have any dreams of expanding any further on their behalf.
We're drawing near to the end of the program, so I'd like to give each and every one of you a closing statement. Colonel Ben-Shalom, we'll start with you.
Delicately, we have to say that there is a sensitivity in Jordan as far as the stability. We talked about the refugees, their economic situation, the type of the regime. In a way, it's surprising with all the turmoil in the Middle East that they stayed so stable. And I think one of the reasons the Americans are there is the issue of stability. That's something I would watch, again, with a lot of respect and even love to my Jordanian neighbors.
I think that there are things that Israel can do to make the relationship better. I think there are several major projects that should have already been implemented many years ago. One of them is the Red Dead Canal, which is being held up by the Israeli side. One of them is the joint trade and industry area near Beit Sha'an, which is stuck on the Israeli side. And there are other things that we can do. That being said, because we've been in, for the past year, a long election season and will continue being a long election season, I don't see these things being done soon.
Mr. Oren?
The biggest concern Israel always had regarding its neighbors was continuity in their policies. And the biggest fear was regime change by violent means, that everything is a bullet away from an upheaval. What happens if Sadat is assassinated? Mubarak took over. He wasn't as warm as Sadat was, but the relationship held. What happens, Allah forbid, if the Jordanian king is assassinated? Will his place be taken by a military officer who will keep the policy, or is it going to be a Hamas or operative or a revolutionary who will give Israel a headache for a very long time? So intelligence-wise, indicators of concerns for the regime are the most of concern to Israel. And if Israel finds that there is a coup brewing, it will probably tell the king.
Indeed, and of course the Crown Prince is also seemingly very promising according to various reports. He's also being very much praised for that. But this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Colonel Ben-Shalom, Mr. Oren, and Dr. Krasna for being here. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time.
You just watched TV7 Jerusalem Studio. We encourage you to pray for the challenges raised in today's program. If you were blessed by our production, please consider supporting TV7 Israel. The details of our respective bank accounts for donations from Europe and the United States appear on the screen. Your generosity allows us to continue to serve God's calling, to broadcast content that truly matters through TV7 Israel from Jerusalem.